Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and before we get on to the Week 9 wide receiver rankings, first a couple of quick show notes. I am going to be ranking the Arizona wide receivers as if Clayton Tune is starting, despite ranking Kyler Murray at my quarterback video as if he was starting. But up to this point in time, consensus seems to be most people think, and there are some telltale signs that it'll be Clayton Tune starting this weekend, so I will rank the wide receivers as such, and same with the Los Angeles Rams wide receivers. I will be ranking them as if Matt Stafford is not playing. And we also need to recap my Week 8 Fadems, Lovems, as well as how I did with my fantasy suggestions. Starting off with the bottom of the barrel, big tournament long shot kind of player that I gave you. I gave you Demario Douglas at 3,300, big waiver wire guy this week. But as far as fantasy goes, especially for DK to help you win, he did not do enough for that. I gave you I'm just taking a shot on kind of guy. It was Christian Kirk. I was pretty high up on him last week. I was a little bit nervous about it. Turns out I was correct to be nervous about that at $5,900 at any price, really. He did not pay off for you, so big fail there. And for a contrarian play, I said I would take a risk on Devontae Adams. I think I was pretty cautious about how I suggested him, basically saying that, yeah, you're taking a big risk here, but if it pays off, you got yourself something that not many other lineups will probably have, hence the contrarian play. It did not pay off for Devontae Adams, so clean sweep there for failures for my fantasy daily fantasy suggestions. And for my Love'ems, we got another clean sweep. I said George Pickens, who stunk. Gave you Rashee Rice, who did not get a touchdown. If he had the touchdown on top of his day, he would have been all right. And then Curtis Samuel got injured, so no go there for my Love'ems. And for my Fadems, I did get 2 out of 3 here. DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper, and then I also had Tyler Lockett. Double down on those wide receivers for Seattle. Maybe not the best plan going forward. I will try to remember that. So let's move on to my Week 9 wide receiver rankings. And up on the screen, you are seeing my first tier of rankings. These are my must-start players. At wide receiver 1, we have Tyreek Hill, followed by Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, Adam Thielen, Mike Evans, Jalen Waddle, and Garrett Wilson. Couple of interesting names in there, potentially. If you do have any questions as to why, I would start these guys over somebody else, just feel free to ask those in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer. And as far as Keenan Allen goes, you see this blue next to his name. This is my player temperature gauge. This is a gauge based on the talent level of these receivers, which is based on PFF grading and how they've done so far this season. What are the expectations for them, given the matchup that they're in, given the Vegas lines and whatnot, for them to produce this week? And so the red is good, just like it is over here. Red is hot matchup. I think that is a good thing, whereas, a cold matchup would be a bad thing. Blue, white, like Mike Evans, close to white here, is going to be more on your neutral side. And, of course, the intensity of the colors would determine how good or bad. So CeeDee Lamb has the most intense red here. But for Keenan Allen, you cannot expect to have a huge, massive week here against the New York Jets. That would be unlikely given the matchup. And that's going to bring us on to my second tier, Chris Olave at wide receiver 11. Obviously, he is a 11 for me. And this whole tier, these are all underperforming guys for the most part. There are a couple of names here that have just one big question mark in the way. Mostly, Cooper Kupp's kind of fits into both categories. A little bit underperforming so far, disappointing, and also, the big question grouping there with Puka Nacua as well, as far as not having Matt Stafford. How much is that going to impact them? But of course, there are a couple of guys in this tier that I do really like, but still, Chris Olave fits into that underperforming tier. Like I said, he is my Love'em of the week. He was essentially a Fade'em for me last week. If I had given him that Fade title, I would have done a little bit better. It's a good matchup versus the Chicago Bears. I like him to have one of those breakout weeks this week. A breakout. I mean, it's Chris Olave, but still, I expect him to have maybe his biggest game of the season this week. Then Cooper Kupp at wide receiver 12 and Puka Nacua, just talked about that. If there is no Stafford, which is how I am currently ranking him, I don't know what to tell you on these two. I have both, and personally, I would rather play Puka over Cup. I think that he's going to have the more friendly, quarterback-friendly route tree, but there's a 0% chance that I'm playing Puka and Cooper Kupp, and there's a 0% chance that I'm playing Puka over Cooper Kupp. So I'm kind of stuck having to play Cooper Kupp because of everything surrounding how good of a player he's been for the last several years. All that said, for both of these two Green Bay Packers, they're not a great wide receiver matchup. I wish it was easy to just outright avoid playing either of these guys, but it's not. And Brett Ripien, their backup quarterback, who would be the one coming in and playing, is an experienced backup. He has been a starter in the league in the past, for whatever that's worth. So there are some things to maybe hang your hat on a little bit here for these guys. Hopefully, Stafford could just play this week. Then at wide receiver 13, have Devontae Adams. Wide receiver 14, we have Devonta Smith. It's not a good matchup for him going up against Dallas, but Philadelphia still has the second highest implied point total via Vegas, and I don't disagree with that determination about the point total. So I'm going to take a shot on Devonta Smith yet again this week. And at wide receiver 15, Puka Nacua. Wide receiver 16, Nico Collins. The other guy, I don't think I quite got there before with my point of having two players in this group that I do actually like and am somewhat excited to get out there this weekend. And Nico Collins was the other guy going up against Tampa Bay. It's a good matchup. I have a good feeling about that offense, kind of just returning to form. And then we have DK Metcalf at wide receiver 17, and he is a fatum for me this week. It's a rough matchup. I think that Seattle will struggle against Baltimore this week, and much like last week, I do think that one of these wide receivers will be fine. Thus, I'm not outright avoiding starting DK Metcalf, but don't be surprised if you get a 5 to 6 point type of performance from him this week, as the expected ranges here suggest from the projections. Essentially, he needs a touchdown in order to be good for you this week. That's really what I see when I'm looking at that. Let's move on to my third tier of wide receivers, and this will be a quick tier. So as you can see in this tier, we have DJ Moore, Michael Pittman Jr., Jacoby Myers, Terry McLaurin, DeAndre Hopkins, and T. Higgins. And you could literally just flip this tier upside down, reverse it, and I would be just as happy about the order that they're ranked in as I am right now. So obviously for all of these guys, DJ Moore and down to T. Higgins, there are some question marks, but there's also some hope for them. In the case of Michael Pittman Jr., my wide receiver 19, I have a fade on him. I do think that Indianapolis is absolutely going to dominate on the ground against Carolina. I don't think Carolina will be able to stop that at all. And so I think there's going to be a limited amount of opportunities in the passing attack for these guys like Michael Pittman to capitalize on. I would like to look elsewhere if possible. And that's going to bring us on to my fourth tier. This is just a little mini tier. After we get out of all these questions that I have, there's like this light at the end of the tunnel with these three guys. They are my comfort zone players this week. At wide receiver 24, we have Gabe Davis, who I have a love him tag on going up against Cincinnati. Cincinnati has allowed some of the largest yards per pass attempt and yards per completion across all of the NFL in both of those categories. We also think that Cincinnati may have turned the corner, which could make for a high-scoring affair, and the Vegas lines would agree with that. Those two things really line up in favor for one of those classic, standard Gabe Davis, big performances. No, we just got off of one that was actually a unique type of Gabe Davis performance, but I think we could see one of those low-volume, high-yardage games with 2 touchdowns for Gabe Davis this weekend. Then at wide receiver 25, I have Zay Flowers. He's had fewer than 10 fantasy points in all but 2 games, and he's had no more than 14.1 fantasy points in any game. He is currently being ranked as the ECR 13. This is why I bring up negative stats for a guy who I have in my comfort zone. He is the EV equalized value, a stat that I track, which is just basically average fantasy points per week, but with consistency kept in mind, wide receiver 34. And so usually that's not too far away from the average fantasy points per week. So essentially, he is barely a wide receiver 3, and currently he's being ranked as essentially a wide receiver 1 this upcoming week going up against Seattle. Seattle is a very good matchup, so I do like him this week. I would be happy to take a shot on Zay Flowers. just not ranked at a top 12, top 13 wide receiver kind of guy for a guy who has not performed like that at all. His best game this season has been 14.1 fantasy points. Then at wide receiver 26, we have Rashee Rice, and he is the best wide receiver. That is officially a thing now. He's got the best quarterback throwing the ball to him in the entire NFL, and he's in a game that has the highest over-under according to Vegas on the week, going up against Miami, high-scoring affair. I don't know that you can get any more comfortable than that. Start Rashee Rice if you can this week. That's going to bring us to my fifth tier of wide receivers, Deontay Johnson in at wide receiver 27, followed by George Pickens, Chris Godwin, Josh Downs, and Drake London. Can you see all of them? You can. All right, so first off, we have two Pitt wide receivers back-to-back here in Deontay Johnson, George Pickens. Deontay above George Pickens, and we saw this offense revert to their old ways, which is good for Deontay Johnson and bad for George Pickens. Essentially, it should mean a high floor, low ceiling for Deontay Johnson and a very inconsistent Gabe Davis maybe-esque type of expectations for George Pickens, as he'll just be working the sideline, getting some deep bombs throughout the game. Very low percentage opportunities for him compared to what he had been getting while Deontay Johnson was out. Regardless of that, this is one of those weeks where you do want to take a chance on a guy like George Pickens. Tennessee is one of the better wide receiver matchups that there is right now, so we're going to take our shot on both of these guys, regardless of who the quarterback is. I really don't care. It could be Pickett or it could be Trubisky. Not a big difference between the two of them. Could even be like a New York Giants situation. Maybe Trubisky will bring a little something to this offense that just hasn't been there with Pickens. Then we have Chris Godwin, and I'm going to put Josh Downs into this group too here, talking a little bit about both of them because, well, this is how it works. I'm going to talk about Chris Godwin. Everything that I say about him, you can just about copy and paste and say about Josh Downs, just tweaked a little bit. So, for Chris Godwin going up against Houston, and Houston is the fourth worst wide receiver matchup this season via average fantasy points allowed. The floor is fine, and the ceiling is what worries me for, once again, both of those guys. At wide receiver 31, Drake London. I didn't give you my name of this tier, but it is my less comfortable tier. We're out of the comfort zone. We're on the edge of the comfort zone with these players, and Drake London just barely makes it into here because the word comfortable and Drake London don't really go well together, but it is a top 5 wide receiver matchup. My biggest concern is that these teams just try to run the ball against one another. However, they're both pretty good against the run, so I don't know how well that will actually work. I will reluctantly get excited to start Drake London this coming weekend. That'll bring us up to the 6th tier, and I did include one more tier, the 7th tier, purely because of the top 2 guys that I have in that tier. They're going to be kind of surprises that didn't make it into my top 36, essentially, types of guys. Amari Cooper's in a good matchup, just has a bad quarterback throwing to him yet again, so it's just a toss-up on which camel's back will break between the two of them. Tyler Lockett could be a rough game against Baltimore. Talked about that plenty with DK. Do you think that one of them will probably have a decent game? But I don't know. Maybe this will be the week where I should have faded both of them. Tank Dell at wide receiver 34. It's a good matchup yet again for him going up against Tampa Bay. I'm expecting a return to form for this passing offense. I wish I could have more confidence in Tank Dell, but I think Tank Dell could obviously be a part of that return to form for this offense for CJ Stroud. Wide receiver 35, we have Brandon Cooks. Obviously, a love him for me this week going up against Philadelphia. And we've seen things looking a little bit better for him as of the past few weeks in this offense. And Philadelphia is the single best wide receiver matchup. This is a spot where I think that Cooks could explode. So I love him this week. Michael Thomas in at wide receiver 36. And Rashid Shaheed right behind him at wide receiver 37. This is kind of a floor versus a ceiling type of thing between the two of them. Either one of them or even both of them could have big weeks. The difference between these two, the floor versus the ceiling. In an easy matchup, I'll take that floor a little bit more over that easier ceiling. And at wide receiver 38, we have Jahan Dawson, the forgotten child in this Washington offense, who has received some attention as of late, which resulted in a big week 8. I don't feel comfortable with him, just as I really don't feel totally comfortable with any of the other guys in this tier, but I'll take a shot on him over, guys that I have ranked lower than him, obviously. And that's going to bring us to my final tier here, Starting off at wide receiver 39, we have Jordan Addison, followed by Marquise Brown, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Tyler Boyd. I don't think I need to explain too much about Romeo Doubs through Tyler Boyd there, but Jordan Addison, Marquise Brown, I probably don't need to explain it, but maybe I do. Minnesota just lost their starting quarterback. They're going to be having Jaron Hall, late round rookie quarterback, slinging the ball for them. Like I said, I think they're going to want to try to run the ball as much as possible against Atlanta. Whatever the case, not a great situation. Rookie. They don't have their star wide receiver anymore. It could be bad for this offense this week. That's very possible, but there is, I think, some hope in there. And then for Marquise Brown, if we have Clayton Tune throw into him, the hope gets washed away when you look at the matchup. Cleveland is a really, really bad matchup for wide receivers, bottom 3 wide receiver matchup, whereas Atlanta is actually an okay matchup, at least, not great, not terrible for Jordan Addison, which is why for Marquise Brown, assuming Clayton Tune is his quarterback, even with Kyler Murray, it's not a great situation here, week 1 of Kyler Murray, but Marquise Brown's going to be a fatum for me. That is it for my wide receiver projections. Let's move on to my DFS buys. This isn't necessarily a bottom of the barrel big tournament long shot, just a less expensive option. Brandon Cooks at 4,400. Talked about it a little bit. Really think that this could be a big week for him in that matchup. So I'll take a shot on that. Really good price. And I'm also going to take a shot on Nico Collins at 5,800 DK bucks. It didn't quite make it into my love him, but you can tell by my ranking that I have a fair bit of confidence in him this week. And for my contrarian play, we're going to go with a guy who, Puka Nacua. At 7,400, he's probably not going to get a whole lot of action. And so there is your chance to maybe differentiate yourself. I think there is a chance for, I talked about it, his route tree to be more quarterback friendly for Brett Rippey, and maybe he just kind of gets peppered with those targets, and in full PPR especially, that could lead to a really solid day. That is it. Thank you very, very much. Please like, comment, subscribe. Running backs video will be out in the morning. Tight ends video comes out Friday. And you can find all of my rankings should be up by the end of today up on the website depending on what time you check, maybe early in the morning as well. And that is it. Peace out.